I personally think that it will be very possible for an amazing applicant to not get in this cycle. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Cindy. I am a 5th year MD-PhD student. Today I want to talk a little bit about the funding cuts that we've seen around the nation as it relates to science. I have made a video about this when they were first kind of starting to announce these cuts all around the nation and the universities. Today I want to talk a little more specifically about what these funding cuts mean for the MD-PhD cycle and the MD-PhD application, since we have just wrapped up one cycle and now we're going on to the next one. There's a Reddit post that I saw titled "Are PhD admissions in the US frozen for the next 4 years?" And then this was then cross-posted onto the MD-PhD subreddit. And so just as a little recap, for the last cycle for PhD admissions, we saw a lot of admissions being rescinded. There was essentially no waitlist movement. And then on the MD-PhD side, we kind of saw similar things to a slightly lesser degree. But still, there are schools that, didn't end up taking any students, like NYU, although you can argue that is independent of the funding cuts. There's also schools that ended up deferring everyone just to the MD pool, even if they got an MD-PhD acceptance because they can't fund them. There are schools that didn't accept anyone off the wait list, and there are schools that had a completely normal cycle. So, kind of different experiences all across the board. From an anecdotal standpoint, I was told that the PhD admissions at my university was cut by 20%. There doesn't seem to be any differences this past cycle about how many MD-PhD students they accepted, but I'm not sure if moving forward they will be aiming for a smaller class size. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these cuts mean for MD-PhD cycles in my opinion, because I am just a student. I am not admissions. I am not in charge of admissions. This is just my opinion. And I'm going to be offering some advice because in my opinion, I think that this upcoming cycle is going to be a lot more competitive. All right. So to start off, the first question that I think people have is, why will MD-PhD programs get affected? And I think to kind of fully answer that question, I should explain a little bit about how MD-PhD funding generally works, which I actually haven't talked about in my channel, but that was gonna be its own separate video at some point, but then these funding cuts and stuff happened, so then I was like, oh, maybe I should hold on to making that video. But this is actually a good opportunity to talk about it. So to understand the funding situation, it's important to understand the two types of MD-PhD programs. One of them is called MSTP programs, which stands for Medical Scientist Training Program, and the other is the Non-MSTP training programs. It's like the all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares thing. So all MSTPs are MD-PhD programs, but not all MD-PhD programs are MSTP programs. So what are MSTP programs? Let's start with that. So like I said, they stand for Medical Scientist Training Programs. What makes them MSTP programs is that they are funded at least in part by the NIH through something called the T32 training grant. And all MSTP programs have funding guaranteed throughout your training. So they will fund your tuition for the medical school years and the graduate school years. In addition, they will give you a stipend to cover living expenses through the med school years and the graduate school years. And so this is the funding guarantee that all MSTP programs have. So I said MSTP programs are funded partially by the T32 training grant. So what are the other parts that funds the students in an MSTP? Typically that will depend a little bit on the school, but kind of the general structure of it is you have the T32 grant. Students can get individual fellowships through the NIH, and these are called the F grants. They're either F30 or F31 usually. The third way that students are funded, especially during the PhD years, is that their professor's lab will fund them. So their PI's grant, usually an R or a K grant, will fund the student. And the fourth way generally is that the medical school has some funds set aside to fund MD-PhD students in the med school years. But you will notice in the 4 things that I just mentioned, 3 of them are NIH related. So it's the T32 that's NIH related, the individual fellowship grants, the F grants are NIH related, and the PI's grant, the R's and the K's, are also NIH related. So even if a school didn't get their training grants cut, individual labs, individual PIs can get their funding cut as well, especially if they do research in an area that is now discouraged. And with potential future cuts and budget constraints, it can be also more difficult to get new grants. And so now let's talk about the non-MSTP programs. So recall when I said MSTP programs have all years of funding guaranteed for you. So med school, grad school, and a stipend. For non-MSTP programs, there's no such guarantee. It kind of really just depends on the school, how much support they give you. So for example, some schools will only fund you during the PhD years. So you're expected to pay tuitions through the medical school years. Some schools will fund you through the med school years and the PhD years, but there's no stipend during the medical school years. It just really depends on the school how they set it up, so just read their website. Obviously, because they're non-MSTPs, they're not funded by the T32 grants. So I saw some people talking on Reddit about how applicants should prioritize non-MSTP programs this year because they will be less affected by the NIH grants because they're not funded by the T32s. That's kind of where that train of thought comes from, but I kind of disagree with it because again, like even MSTP programs are not 100% funded by T32s. So in my opinion, yes, the non-MSTP programs won't have to worry about losing their T32 potentially, but their funding sources are probably still a combination of the PI, the medical school, and individual fellowship grants. MSTP and non-MSTP, everyone's going to be affected by these NIH cuts. Nobody is truly safe unless you somehow manage to find a lab that is entirely funded by industry or a medical school or program that is entirely funded through institutional funds instead of relying on the NIH. So that is my opinion, and important to emphasize once again that is my opinion because I don't have any like insider looks to this or anything. This is just how things have been explained to me. This is just what I understand of the system. And so now let's move on to some of my advice for you guys for applying this cycle. My number one advice is still to apply broadly. This is the same for every cycle. I have always said that you need to apply broadly. Usually when people think apply broadly, they think of, reach, match, safety. There's no such thing as a safety school in medical school admissions, unfortunately, and especially not in MD-PhD admissions. Every single school is difficult to get into. And so what I mean by apply broadly is just don't apply only to schools in New York. Don't apply only to the Ivy League and like Stanford. Choose different programs, especially outside of the top 20. And if you can, try to apply broadly geographically as well, because I think that really helped me when I was applying. My second piece of advice is to potentially apply to more schools than you would have on a normal cycle. Before filming this video, I did take a look at the AAMC fact sheet. They don't have the data out yet for this cycle that just ended, but they have the cycle data for 2023 and 2024. And on average, MD-PhD applicants applied to 17 schools. On a normal cycle, I would recommend 20. For this cycle, maybe try 25 or even 30 if you are able to swing it. I know not everyone is able to, but if you are able to, try to apply to a few more schools than you would on a normal cycle. And on a similar vein, definitely potentially consider non-MSTPs. If the full funding guarantee and stipend is really important to you, then you have to read the website to make sure you have a clear idea of what to expect financially if you go there, obviously. Some people on the internet are saying that non-MSTPs are now safer than MSTPs, but again, if you watch the beginning of this video, I don't necessarily think so. I think they're still going to be affected. And my last piece of advice is to turn things in early, if at all possible. It is currently June 19th. As of filming this, you're going to be seeing this a little bit later because it takes me some time to edit. But if you still don't have your primaries in, it's getting a little late. Medical school admissions is rolling. So typically they review applications as they come in and give out interview invites as they come in. So you want to try to be on like the top of that pile, if at all possible. And as you get those secondaries, try to turn them back around in around 2 weeks. I feel like this tip always stresses people out and they're like, oh, is 15 days or 16 days okay? Yes, it is okay. If you need a couple extra days to make sure your writing is good, take those couple extra days. It is not a hard and fast rule, but if you're pushing a month, it's getting a little too long. My kind of opinion / prediction is that this is about to be kind of a incredibly competitive cycle up ahead just because there's going to be less spots. And I don't think there's going to be a change in the number of applicants that apply. I personally think that it will be very possible for an amazing applicant to not get in this cycle. So I just want to encourage everyone to apply broadly and put the best foot forward if at all possible. I'm curious too to see how it will all turn out, and maybe I'll make an update video when the 2025 AAMC fact sheet comes out to recap the previous cycle. All right. And with that, that's going to be it for today. If you found this video to be helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. And also feel free to leave a comment on what you would like to see next. That's going to be it for today, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!